Hello and welcome back to the ReFramework training. In the previous videos of this series, we had built a project with the ReFramework template and orchestrator queues. Before we can move processes into production, we must test various aspects. For example, are the settings correctly read? Are the applications initialized? Are the exceptions handled as expected? The testing features provide an easy way to implement unit tests of ReFramework components. It's used to build a regression test set to be run when new versions of the automation projects are being published. Please note that for this demo, we're presenting pre-configured test cases for our project. We'll explore how the activities found inside the UiPath.Testing Activities package, along with a set of pre-built testing workflows, can help us to thoroughly check the process execution. We'll start with the general test case workflow. This is a data-driven test case that has its input from the tests Excel file. Let's open the tests.xlsx file. Here, we can see the workflow file path and the expected results, which is available in the results sheet. Let's close this file and run this workflow. We'll choose Run File with Data Variations. Here, while executing, we can select some of the workflow paths and their respective outcomes to test. Now, looking at the output panel, we can see that two executions have started at the same time. Here we can see that the first execution started, and it's passed, and the other one that we've selected also executed successfully. So in the general test case workflow, we just invoke the workflow file name for each entry in the Excel file, and we'll try to catch the exception that we might find. In case there is an exception, we can set the exception to the output variable and then compare it with the expected exception. Great, let's move on to the next test case. Let's go to Init All Settings, Test Cases. In this test case, we normally read and set the config file. The Init All Settings test case verifies if the config dictionary was created and holds all of the information from the config file. To do so, we're invoking the Init All Settings workflow. Also, we're verifying whether the config is loaded or not. Let's run this now for our use case, and let's see if indeed we have all of the data in the config file as we expect to be. We can now look in the output panel. Great! We have the value 18 for the config dictionary pairs count, and it contains the max retry number, which is the key that we wanted to verify. Let's move on to the Init All Applications test case. Here in the given part, config is set in the Init All Settings workflow. Going forward to the When part, we invoke the Init All Applications workflow that is used to open the applications and log in. Basically, it should be an action that should be done once. And in Then, the Verify Control attribute activity is used to check if the application is opened and the title UiPath should exist. At the end, you can close the application by using the Invoke Close All Applications workflow. So, this is how this test case is structured. Let's run this test case as well. We'll choose Run File from the drop-down menu. We've seen that in this test case, we have the Given, When, Then sections. In the Given section, we set the context or we give the input to the test case. In the Then section, we clean up and we perform the verification. And in the When section, we perform the action. The UI demo login window appears. Enters the valid username and password and click on Login. When you click on Login, the UI demo application will open, having the title UiPath on the screen, which is exactly what we're checking. It all looks good, and we're back in Studio. In the output panel, you can see that since the verification is passed, this test case was able to open the application. Also, it closes the application at the end after it finishes the verification. Our next test case is the Get Transaction Data test case. This one will verify if the orchestrator queue is configured correctly, and we're able to get the transaction items from the orchestrator queue. Also, we verify the transaction item is not nothing expression to check if the transaction item was successfully retrieved. Then we update the transaction item's progress to Tested. Okay, we're all set. Let's run this test case. Remember, for this type of test case, it's always better to have good error handling techniques. Just in case the test case failed, we should be able to catch the proper exception and handle it correctly. But in our case, the test case is passed and the transaction item that is obtained after the get transaction data workflow was not nothing. Now let's explore the process test case. This workflow gets a certain transaction item based on a transaction number, processes it, and determines whether we got the correct result. This test case requires that we have the config set and the applications initialized. Then it gets the transaction item from the queue and provides it as input for the invoked process workflow. And then we run the invoke process workflow that's going to process the item that we have. We'll test to check if we obtain a transaction number. Okay, let's run this test case. We also must close all applications that are going to clean up the context and prepare it for the next test case run, because test cases should be ran unattended and on a regular basis to identify any issues that might occur. Okay, here is the UI Demo login window where we log in. UI Demo opens. And now the bot fills in the information from the transaction item in the fields and clicks Accept. So, it verifies if it can create the transaction number in the UI Demo application. Next, let's move on to the main test case. This test case assumes that the process has a reporting system in place. It must be configured to verify if the obtained output matches the one expected. Let's move on to the next test case, which is Workflow Test Case Template. If you would like to test the workflows as you see here in the UI Demo folder, you can use this template. Having the given, when, and then block, you can perform all of the actions and verifications which are needed for the workflow to be tested. This is what we're doing here. We're testing a workflow from UI Demo folder. Next is the UI Demo _add transaction test case. Here, the variation test case is built for demo purposes, and for this variation test case, we have the variation test file already added in the project. To see the variation file, you need to run the test case with data variations. You can see all of the predefined values here defined by yourself. You can select all of them. For now, we're clicking on the Cancel button. Here, we're testing whether after entering all of the data, we can generate the transaction number or not. Let's run this file one more time. Select 2 entries and hit Run. Basically, we're testing that the workflow that we've built is reliable, that it fits certain scenarios, and to test if the application has expected behavior under the given scenario. So, with the data which we're running now, you'll see the transaction item and the number is being created. Here as a precondition, the config is set and the UI Demo application is invoked. Okay, we can see in the output panel the verification passed. Awesome! Moving on to the UI Demo _open test case. We first initialize all settings. Second, we invoke UI Demo _open workflow. And we check whether the app state contains the UiPath title or not. Finally, we must do the cleanup of the environment using the Close All Applications file. Let's quickly run this test case as well. The expected behavior is that it will open the application and not complete any transaction information. It will just check if it was able to open the application and log in. This is the actual functionality of the UI Demo workflow. If we open the workflow, we can see here all of the activities which are green, and these are those which we're able to execute. We have a more detailed explanation about the test execution that we've done in a workflow you can see in the Test Explorer panel. You can check all of the test cases that we executed. You can also check the activity coverage as well as the descriptor coverage in case we're using Object Repository by clicking on the respective tabs at the bottom. Great! This concludes our walkthrough of testing a ReFramework project using Test Suite. We hope that it convinced you to download the materials and try out the testing features. To sum up, do you think that you can name the test cases that we've showcased in this video? What does each test case verify? Thank you for watching, and until next time, happy automation!